will get a second video and move into the second part of this session. And really, we only felt we needed to do this when last week the Planning Inspectorate shared its letter announcing that the examination was due to start and that the first stage in that, the preliminary meeting, was going to be taking place on the 23rd of March. Now, everybody who registered as an interested party in the Sizewell C planning process last September should have received this letter, informing you about what was happening and inviting you, if you want to register to speak at the preliminary meeting, to do so by the 10th of March. So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to say a bit about what we would like you to do. But first, I'm going to take a moment to explain the bigger picture of what we're all trying to achieve. I think, as you're very well aware, we've said time and time again, if you think Sizewell C is approved, think again. There's lots of people who consider it to be a done deal. This, by the way, is on our website at stopsizewellc.org/planning. It's on our Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So if you know of people who think Sizewell C is inevitably going to go ahead, you can share this graphic with them. It's got lots of reasons, basically money, politics and planning, that are why it is not a done deal. And you can even print out a copy and stick it in your window, as the lovely Jenny Kirtley did for her local shop just this week. I'm sure that I speak for both Task and ourselves when I say we are campaigning organisations, and making sure that we carry on campaigning and we have the capacity to campaign throughout this planning process is critically important. You know, and we're all trying to influence politicians, to influence potential investors, you know, and do everything we can to stop Sizewell C, as well as engaging in the planning process. Because the opportunity in the planning process to make an impact has recently been shown to be greater than we previously thought. You are probably aware of recent news that the Planning Inspectorate in the last year has recommended that 2 major infrastructure projects be refused. The most relevant one for us is the Woolver nuclear project on the island of Anglesey, which the Planning Inspectorate said, amongst other things, would affect European designated wildlife sites, rare species, their habitats. And, you know, that's obviously going to be a major issue here at Sizewell. The second one was the consent for the Norfolk Vanguard offshore wind project. The Planning Inspectorate recommended it be refused. The Secretary of State said it should have consent. And literally in the last week, I think, the decision was overturned on judicial review by a judge who said that the cumulative impacts, in other words, the combined impacts, all the different parts of the project, again, a huge issue here with all these other energy projects planned for Suffolk, hadn't been properly taken into account. So, so with working on the planning process, our objectives are firstly, to provide enough evidence that the Planning Inspectorate recommends Sizewell C should be refused consent, lots of ammunition. We know, of course, the Secretary of State could overrule this recommendation, but if we achieved that, it would be a massive moral victory. We all know this is the wrong project in the wrong place. Secondly, is sending a signal of support from the people of Suffolk to ministers and elected representatives, saying there's huge concern in Suffolk about Sizewell C. We already know that the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has said that EDF has to take people with them. They have to build local popular support. So our challenge is really to show that they've not done that. And if lots of people want to take part in the planning process, that will be registered very strongly by the Planning Inspectorate. That will be reported back. And so that's the other reason that we really want to encourage everybody who's able to, who's registered as an interested party, to request to speak at the preliminary meeting later this month. Now, my colleague Paul is going to shortly explain how to do this and what you can do even if you're not registered as an interested party. But we thought it would first be very useful to ask Marianne Fellows, who I know many of you know, to say a few words about what it was like taking part in the preliminary meeting of the Scottish Power Renewables planning process. So Marianne, I'm now going to try and find you in the huge numbers of people taking part and ask you to turn your video on. And
Good evening, Alison, Pete, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good.
Now I've found
Okay.
you, I can pin you so you can speak.
Okay. Okay, so well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to just speak briefly, Alison. I'd like to say as well a big thank you to all of you who took part in the Scottish Power Renewables Development Consent Order hearings already. I know some of you have. I did want to just mention a few things that I had experienced as a way to encourage people and to tell you that it really does make a difference and it is important to do this. So as a member of Albury Town Council, we all agreed that we should get involved, and we took part in the consultation phases before the development consent order started. And 4 of us worked on reading the materials and suggesting the wording for our relevant representation. And then I agreed to be the person that would speak at the hearings. This was the first development consent order I'd ever taken part in. And I'm not a professional, you know, I'm an amateur, and what I do for the town council is as a volunteer. And like many of you, I don't have a lot of time to devote to anything like this, but it was something that I felt was really important. The inspectorate team did welcome our input, and they really did seem to take account, as Alison said, of the volume of people who asked to be involved. So it's a very important message. For example, so many people asked to speak at the open floor hearings, which is anyone can speak at that, that's registered as an interested party, that they had to put more hearings on. And that was a very powerful message for them. So what's a preliminary meeting? Okay, so basically this is the pre-meeting before the examination starts, and I know Paul will tell you a lot more about the detail, but what gets discussed at the preliminary meeting is what are the things that they need to examine. So from all the relevant representations that you sent in, they take out the main topics, the main concerns. Some things are pretty standard planning criteria, like noise pollution, light pollution, but the things we were able to push to be included by speaking at the preliminary meeting were things like the cumulative impact, because they hadn't really understood all the various projects that were proposed for this area, and that it is a very small geographic area that we all use and the road network that we all share. After they agreed what all the topics were, these then become what are called issue-specific hearings. So there's 2 or 3 hours set aside just to talk about each of those topics. So you can see how important it is to let the inspectorate know at the planning hearing, at the preliminary hearing, what you think should be included in the examination. The other thing that's discussed at the preliminary hearing is what the timetable is going to be for the 6 months of the hearing. And they will take into account if there's any key dates that either interested parties, statutory consultees, or the applicant says it can't meet, and work around that. But you do literally just have 6 months. There's no timeline for the preliminary hearings, and they can take as long as needed. So again, that's another reason why we need to push to attend and to speak, to make sure the planning inspectorate knows the strength of feeling and all the issues that need to be examined. So there's open floor hearings, there's issue-specific hearings, there's also compulsory acquisition hearings. But the last thing I wanted to mention is in between each of these, there are deadlines by which anybody can write in to talk about what they heard at the meetings. All the meetings are streamed live and recorded, and there's also a transcript that's put on the inspectorate website. And then there's a deadline by which you need to comment on. And the more people that comment on what's said by either saying, no, that's not true, or providing more evidence, then that's the more the inspectorate will understand the real position. So why should you do this? Why did I do it? It's really a way to make a difference. There's nothing more frustrating in the world by feeling you can't make a difference about something, that you have no influence. And I really believe we do, because the planning inspectorate definitely took note of some things we've said and then asked the applicant to give more information about something or challenge them on something. They said that local people's information about bird habitats was vital to them. And if you don't get involved, you know, in life, I'd rather be condemned for something I did rather than something I didn't do. There's a lot of support out there for you. We will speak to you. Alison and Paul can provide some really interesting information to help you. I think what Roy has said today has really helped us too, to understand what we need to do. So you're not on your own. People even text me while I was speaking or emailed me and said, yes, good point, or can you mention this? So although I'm sitting in my room on my own for hours at a time, hating looking at myself in a screen, I was getting tremendous support. So it is something you can do, and I will encourage you to do so as much as you can, especially if you're here representing a town or a parish council. If you don't get involved in the examination, you're not going to be able to advocate for your community if this is approved. Because if you didn't mention it in the hearing or in the examination, you can't then request either mitigation or compensation. Okay, so happy to take any questions or to speak to people outside of this meeting or via email, and also Alison has my mobile. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm hoping we will have questions after Paul said his piece, so please stick around. Paul.
No way. Right, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm going to concentrate on this preliminary hearing rather than anything else, because that's the next thing in line. And as Alison says, we've got until the 10th of March, which is next Wednesday, to make an application to be a part of those hearings. Just to go back to what Marianne said, I've also taken part in some of the SPR hearings, and I absolutely agree with what she said. The inspectors are listening to you. They know that you're not necessarily a professional in these things, that you're just doing it as a, you know, out of the goodness of your heart and your care for your community. And they are very willing to hear, and they will ask you some questions sometimes, or they will ask you to send them a written representation based on what you say. They are very, very eager to listen, and they are very, very easy. You're not going to get questioned by EDF. You're going to get stuff from the examiner, and they do it in a very, very friendly and listening mode. So please don't be afraid of it from that point of view. It's a very good environment. If they ask you to come and speak, please do go and speak. So don't hesitate on that count. Okay, let's now get to the preliminary meeting. As Marianne says, this is what sets the tone for the full examination, which starts after the second preliminary meeting. There are some things that really we need, or we would like your support in. The first one is about timings. In fact, item 2, which we didn't mention on our on the website, is where they talk about the virtual preliminary meeting. And one of the issues we have with the preliminary meeting is that actually the order in which things are being done is wrong. So we have these changes that EDF have made to the DCO application, to the planning application, which is item 5. But there is a list of things that are going to be examined, which are going to be discussed at item 4. Well, this is completely the wrong way around. We need to know whether those items are going to be accepted to make sure that any changes that are in those requests get into the list of assessment principal issues. If we don't do that, you're not going to have a complete set of principal issues, or you're going to have to come back and talk about it all over again. So really, the first thing I'm suggesting, which isn't on our website, is you have to speak about item 2, because item 2 is where the examining authority will talk about the preliminary meeting and the agenda for the preliminary meeting which you are in. So that's a good place to start. The second place we'd like you to talk about, as I said, is these items 4 and 5. And these are the two that are in the wrong order. Now, the reason we wanted to talk about item 5 is simply because these are all the new things that EDF have put into this planning application. And as usual, there isn't enough information to actually even make an assessment, never mind figure out what should go into item 4, which is the items that are going to be assessed. The other thing to note is that actually one of the items, the temporary BLF, is not what was actually consulted upon in the consultation. It's now a small jetty. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that what you were consulted on isn't actually what is being proposed. So there are good reasons why we need item 5 talked about straight after item 3. And then we can go to item 4 and talk about the initial assessment of principal issues. And there's information sitting on the website about this. The other thing that is not well brought out in the principal issues is that about the hard coastal defence and the soft coastal defence. That is not really, it's sort of maybe in some of the things in there within a line item about coastal stuff, but it's very, very vague. And we need to talk about this really seriously. It needs to be a line item of its own. We could probably have a morning session on it, quite frankly, but it is a really important piece. I don't know whether it's because the planning inspectors think that it's going to be handled by the Office for Nuclear Regulation under safety, but what they perhaps don't realise, and this is what Marianne was saying, is that actually this is a big issue for the coast, both south and north of the site. And there is already several concerns about the limits to what EDF are putting on monitoring on either side of the site. So there's a lot of reasons why this needs to be talked about in full. So the two things that are in there, there's the coastal erosion. The other thing, there's a one-liner about carbon impact. And we want to have that brought out and talked about, contributions or lack of contribution to net zero and all of that sort of idea. So those are the two things that really should be in this list in the initial assessment of principles, along with stuff out of the, presumably it will be accepted, the changes that come in item 5. So really we would like you to put it in your own words, but bring these issues up. The next thing that we would like to talk about, item 6, is the timetable for the main meeting. So for the main examination. Now, you're probably aware that actually the first day of the preliminary meeting is the day before our councils go into Purdah. So if it runs into a second day, they probably won't be able to attend or take any part, simply because they'll be in Purdah because of the council elections later on in the month or in May. So we need to point out that actually this entire exercise is going to be taking part when our councillors are not able to really make a proper contribution. And in fact, at the moment, the second meeting, the end of the preliminary meeting is in the middle of Purdah. So it means if any contribution was necessary at the second part, our councillors can't do it. They simply will not be allowed to get involved in this. So we need them to push out the end date of this if we can possibly do it. And there's no reason to not ask for it. They might not do it, but it's certainly worth. And if you look at it, There are other advantages to pushing this out, because if we put it out 6 weeks, we can actually make sure that the first set of open floor hearings go beyond June the 21st, which is the date at which we should be able to have all of these meetings in person, assuming we all do our part, stay at home, save the NHS, etc., etc. So please, you know, it's well worth pushing for at least 6 weeks and say, don't hold that second meeting for 6 weeks longer, because as soon as that meeting is held, 6 months, that's all we've got, and they will have to follow through with whatever their timetable is. So it's really, really important that you actually make that point to them. There are other reasons why we don't want them to be running this at the time they are. The Scottish Power planning application is still running until the 6th of April. So that actually is in the middle of that preliminary meeting. I think we're going to be stuck with the examination running over the summer, whichever way we look at it, but to push it out, to get those open floor hearings, the issue specific hearings in person rather than virtual would be a massive advantage. And there are a lot of people who do not deal well with the virtual environment. And I include the inspectors on that, because sometimes even their lines are not as good as they might be. So there are good reasons not to trust the virtual environment. What else have I got to say in this? Yeah, as Marianne actually said, the preliminary meeting doesn't have a statutory timetable. It doesn't have law behind it. It can take as long as it needs to take. So this is really something we can try to get changed to everybody's advantage who wants to actually take part in these. So please do try and put in a request to be heard at the preliminary hearing. I filled in mine today for Minsmere Levels stakeholder group and thought quite a lot about what I put in the little boxes. As soon as you say, yes, I want to actually speak at this, box will pop up and you have to put in your main issues. Think about them, but it's not onerous. It might sound a little bit, you just need to think about what you're going to say. And if you don't want to speak at every single piece like I've been talking about, that's fine. Speak to the ones that you really know that you have an input and you feel passionately about in one way or another, and that would be good enough. Just the more the merrier. Please do ask. Doesn't mean you're going to be asked to speak either. So they don't have to hear you if a lot of other people actually say they want to, but they will attempt to do this. And that in its own right might make the whole thing longer anyway. So don't be afraid, take a look at it and actually fill it in. I haven't got anything else to say. I'm going to pass it. Oh, now I do believe maybe Chris or Task want to have something to say at this point. So Pete or Chris, do you want to say something else? Hand over to you.
Okay, yeah, I'm quite happy to speak. Hi everyone. Yeah, I just really wanted to sort of reiterate what Marianne and Paul have said about the importance of just getting involved. I think everyone's got different reasons why we don't want to see Sizewell C built. Everyone will have different impacts on them. It'd be good to get over your personal views in terms of, I know we're not talking about, it's not an issue specific hearing, but we'll all have issues. We've all been in lockdown for so long. It's very unfortunate that the first summer we might actually be able to get out. They're talking about having all the hearings. So there's very good reasons to request that the second preliminary meeting is deferred. And the longer, as Paul said, we can defer it, the better, because if we can push it into a time when the COVID restrictions are gone, then the open floor hearing is going to be much better for all of us. And also, if you do register to speak and you change your mind later, that doesn't matter. You can pull out. You're not going to be obliged to. And as Paul said, there's 3 or 4 different items you can speak on. but you don't have to speak on all of them. So you can select what you want to speak on. But the more, and as Alison said, the more that people, or the more people that say they want to be involved, then that does send a real message, hopefully to PINS. And as I understand it, and as everyone said, the examiners are quite quite good at trying to take in the information, and you won't be asked sort of questions directly by EDF's lawyers or anything like that. It'll only be the examiners that could possibly ask you a question. So yeah, everyone get involved, and sort of Stop Sides We'll See and ourselves, we're there for advice. So if anyone's got any queries, obviously you know where to contact us.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to briefly share my screen before we take questions. I just want to show you, oh, and of course my screen is now. Can somebody tell me if you can see it? So on our website, if you go to stopsideswe'llsee/planning, you'll find yourself on this page, which has just got some basic links, including to where all the documents are available that the Planning Inspectorate has published. Just a reminder that the deadline is 10th of March, an outline timetable of how we expect the examination would run. We're now looking at the Secretary of State not making a decision about planning consent until next April. So the whole thing has slipped. But there is a link here. If you're an interested party, and we encourage you to register, visit our page on the preliminary meetings, is one I made earlier. I have been updating it while Paul was speaking, so the new things that he said are now here. So here are the dates of the preliminary meeting. Here is some instructions about applying to speak. There's a link to the form that you need to fill in just here. Here's a list of the agenda items that you could request to speak at. And here are some points that you would like to make. And I've just added here agenda item 2, a point that, you know, later agenda items are in the wrong order. It's really important, as Paul said, to rewrite this in your own words, because we don't want the Planning Inspectorate to think, you know, we're all robots and, you know, we've all just been told to copy the same information. And if you're not registered an interested party, or you really feel you can't speak, then there's absolutely no reason why you can't just send an email to the Planning Inspectorate making these points. You know, and I would very strongly encourage you to do that. So that's on our website. As I say, our main website homepage has got a menu item which says take part in the planning process. So I will stop screen sharing now, but that's told you where you can go to find the information. Any questions? Anybody want to ask? There's lots of questions happening in the chat, and lots of answers being provided by Marianne and others who've got experience of this. But if anybody would like to ask their question to the meeting, please unmute yourself and do so, because we're...
I think we've got one from Rachel, Smith Light.
Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, hiya. I was planning to speak, but all this talk of PERDA, I'm obviously aware of PERDA, but I didn't know that would mean that I couldn't speak.
It's only county councillors.
Ah, okay. I thought it was something like that. Thank you.
Cool. We've got Josie.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. And maybe this was going on in the chat. You don't have to answer it today, but if you wouldn't mind putting this up with all your helpful hints, is kind of the logistics of it. In particular, you know, how long is someone allowed to speak? How does someone know if they're going to be called upon? Meaning, do you have to log in at 8 o'clock in the morning and sit there and listen every second because you're waiting to be called upon? All those types of things, because it is a long day. And would it be okay, for example, can you have a backup? Like Marianne, I speak for my council, but it's the whole day. And I just know that there's, you know, I've got other commitment. Can I have another counselor standing by as backup in case we get called? It's all those types of things that I think those of us who have never attended one of these things just don't understand how it works. Thank you.
Marianne, go for it.
Just really quickly, right? Yeah, so as a town council, you register and you say who the main person will be, but you say they may be, you know, there may be other people as well or instead of. And so you just let them know on a hearing by hearing basis how you're going to do it. But the most important thing is to register as a council and say you want to speak and provide representation. How you know if you've got a slot is you'll get an email, and the planning inspector also publishes the agendas on the website. Now, it takes a while to get used to the website. I've learned a lot, you know, over the weeks, and it's good to keep checking in and look to see what's on there. And I'm sure Alison and Paul will let you know when agendas are published and when papers are there. There's also a full list of all documents in date order. So you learn how to find things on the website, but you will personally get an email with a link if you're speaking, and they'll publish the agenda of when your slot is. If it's during the open floor hearings, you get a time slot. Everyone in the first session has to log on at the beginning, and they do what's called a preliminary meet, a sort of welcome meeting. They make sure you can log in, tell you how it's going to run, tell you must mute yourself, you can't unmute yourself until you're asked to, things like that. Just the housekeeping stuff. 20 minutes before it starts, and then everyone joins the meeting. It's all recorded live as well, and you get your time slot. You're asked to speak. If it's an issue specific hearing, everyone logs in at the same time. You listen to the topic, and then the inspector will come in turn if you feel you have something relevant to ask or comment on. You indicate by raising your yellow hand, and they will come to you to speak. So it's all very well managed, and it all goes through the chair of the meeting that day. Each of the planning inspectors take it in turns to lead on a topic, and then others may ask questions. But it's very well managed.
Thanks, Marianne.
Of course, if we manage to get these as in-person hearings, it might be slightly different. But on the other hand, what Marianne says is absolutely right. It's very well organised for these, certainly for these preliminary meetings. You'll know when you're expected to speak. Everything will be there for you.
Any other hands raised?
Is that Anne Mitcham trying to speak?
Anne, would you like to?
You're muted.
Sorry, it's
You're
Bill.
muted.
Isn't it Bill Turnbull wanting to speak?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Bill.
Well spotted. Thank you very much. This may have passed me by, but this preliminary meeting, is it merely about procedural issues, or is it about our substantive feelings about the project as a whole?
Procedural, Bill. It's all about procedure and what's going to be examined and in what order and all of the other stuff. So, but it is timing. I mean, this is the business. If we want to actually get them to push this out so that we can get all the open floor hearings, for instance, to be in person rather than online, then we need to try and persuade them. And there are various efforts going on, including from the county councils and others, that they wanted this all delayed because of the closeness to Scottish Power, amongst other things. So there are a lot of people asking for this to be moved backwards, but we're at the position we're at. So asking them not to have the second preliminary meeting until for another 6 weeks actually would effectively make that all possible.
Okay, thank you.
But just say also, whilst it's not an issue specific hearing, obviously, as Paul said earlier, it is the opportunity to ask for any pertinent issues you believe aren't included in PIN's principal issues list already, which is part of the letter that came out last week. That is your opportunity to ask for that to be included. That's something we didn't touch on before. If people didn't actually want to speak in person, they obviously can write in and make their points in writing as well, as long as they do that. I think it's by the 10th of April.
10th of March, it's the same, yes. And the email address to write to the Planning Inspectorate is on that page that I just showed you.
Yeah.
I have got Anne, and also Edwina has unmuted, which suggests that she may have a question. Anne, would you like to go first?
Yes, I was just going to ask if we could possibly see Pete's comments after the meeting's over that he put on chat about the green, oh, that's come out of my head, carbon neutral of nuclear power station. It's quite long and I haven't been able to read it all.
Yeah, I will save that as a file and I'll make sure people can access it.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
Cool. Edwina, did you?
Hi there. Just a quick question. If we actually have live hearings, where will they be held? Do you know?
Probably it's Nate.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was certainly where the SPR ones were before they were suspended. But we don't know what arrangements they're making.
Okay, but we won't be travelling to Bristol or somewhere exotic.
No, they have to hold them locally. I mean,
okay.
that is part of the whole brief. So,
thank you.
Adrian, did you want to speak?
Yes, please, if I may. Apologies, I did come to rather late to matters regarding Sizewell C. I think mainly because I couldn't believe it was ever going to go ahead, knowing that the cost of nuclear energy is just so expensive, prohibitively expensive, that I couldn't believe it was ever going to happen. And also knowing that EDF was struggling to get finance for it. So I guess I just sat back and thought, well, that's not going to happen. But obviously it might. But something that has occurred to me, I expect it's occurred to many of you, is that all our local councils have declared a climate emergency. Both Felixstowe, East Suffolk, Suffolk County Council, I believe. If they've declared a climate emergency, how can any of them back Sizewell C?
Well, we have a number of county and district councillors on this call, so I don't know whether Guy or Chris or Rachel would like to answer that.
Yeah, I'll wade in. It's a really good point. I please don't think that my views represent those of my council East Suffolk, because they don't. I wouldn't be on this call otherwise. You wouldn't assume that. But I'm afraid the cabinet and the Tory majority, which is our council, think that it's low carbon, I'm afraid. And we have tried to point out in debates and elsewhere that it most certainly is not. I don't think they all individually as councillors necessarily think that it is, but that's the line that they're having to toe on it. And there's a lot of misinformation on that, but we're trying to disabuse them of that falsehood. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Anne Westover.
Not very good answers. Right, okay, yes, I just wanted to ask, Richard and I have had chats, as you know, we talk quite regularly, and other people here in Wickham Market. One of the things we thought we might need to raise at the preliminary meeting is a couple of issues, one relating to the Southern Park and Ride site. It's listed as a topic in Annex C, but there are a whole suite of drawings that are submitted but not for approval, and we want to sort of raise the importance of those being considered in the examination, because they're all the ones that talk about, well, lighting, which is obviously a big concern. We've been told that there would be a 4-hour break in the shift pattern, but obviously the news from Hinckley is very different, so that doesn't surprise me. And the other thing I think we're going to have to raise at the preliminary meeting, the more I think about it, is that EDF are promising us a suite of highway mitigation measures through Wickham Market, allegedly to mitigate the impact of 1,000 extra cars a day coming through the village. At the moment, we haven't really seen a final package of information. And even if we get that in a week's time, we've still got to consult the public. on those proposals. So again, I think we're beginning to think that's got to be a specific topic. It comes under the heading of traffic maybe, but it's much more specific to Wickham Market in particular, and I think Leiston are probably dealing with similar issues. So I'm assuming you, Paul and Alison will think that, and Marianne will think that's a good idea to raise those topics.
I think that it doesn't hurt to raise as many specific topics that you want considered in the examination as possible. You know, it's not for you to interpret whether the examining authority's list, you know, covers these things. You want their assurances that it definitely will. So I wouldn't second guess. I would just make sure that you raise it.
Yeah,
I think it's, I mean, we're in a similar position in Thabberton and Eastbridge Parish Council in discussions about various aspects of the Sizewell Link road. But I think you've got to be a bit careful about how you go about that, because if you bring it up in, the inspectors may not appreciate that being in there, apart from making sure that it is a subject for examination. But if you think that what's happening at the moment is you're not getting the information fast enough, then you should send them a separate letter and say, look, we're expecting this, you've got this program of events, but it's highly unlikely we're going to get the information we require and to be able to do all of the consultations that we have to within the 6 months that you're planning. It's another good reason to push out, you know, the that meeting. So you might want to take it that way and just say that those discussions mean that this 6 month period is going to start too early.
yeah, thanks for that. That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I'm muted. Marianne, and then I think unless there are any more after that, we'll probably close.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to what was just said in terms of the examining inspectors can only examine what we tell them about or what the applicant tells them about. They can't make it up. They can't go out and find it themselves. So don't worry about, oh, do they need to know this? Don't they know? If you tell them, they will make that determination whether it's relevant or not. And it's so important because that can then spark another inquiry or another question they ask. So it's just tell them everything about your situation. Now, in terms of timing, it is difficult to know when to raise things sometimes, but I always just say to the inspectorate, you know, I'm in your hands. If you think this is relevant, I can give you more information. And sometimes they'll say, send it in writing, or sometimes they'll say, no, go for it now. Tell us about it now. So it's just be prepared. Just take, you know, what you think is important to you and ask them, and then they will go take it from there. That's the most important advice I can give you, really.
Fantastic, thank you. We have, as I've mentioned several times, recorded this, and I'm going to load it onto our website. I'll also make sure Task have a copy to make available, so that, you know, you can review this. And I just want to reiterate, I don't know whether is this going to be back to front? Just want to reiterate that.
Oh, no, it's all right. It's okay.
Silly, yeah.
Down a bit.
StopSizewellC.org. I know I've got the silly background, but you really don't want to see my front room. Honestly,
if you go to the Stop Sizewell C site and there's a thing that says planning right at the top, you'll get there.
Yeah, you'll find it.
Can I just also say it's important to get in touch with your own parish and town council and ask them to register. And also it's important to keep asking East Suffolk and Suffolk County Council to represent the views of residents and not just to look at what is their agenda in terms of the issues.
Thank you, absolutely spot on. So we'll also, if you're on our mailing list, and you'll get this information about this and a reminder to register tomorrow. And we'll also write to all town and parish councils and make sure they know that they can watch this video, and remind them to register too. So it's been a bit of a marathon session, but I want to thank Pete for chairing the first session brilliantly, Roy in his absence for just being amazing and telling us like it is, and Marianne for at the very last minute agreeing to come on and tell us about her experiences. Thank you, Marianne. But most of all, to all of you, I mean, our organisations are nothing without all of you. So thank you so much for your support.
And to you, Alison, and to you,
Thank you.
Paul,
Everything we
and
can
Pete,
to-
and just everyone. Your relentless work is amazing. Needs to be credited.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much indeed. And we'll be in touch and see you soon.